This is Jonas. Welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Wire podcast. In this episode, I speak with Martin Walters of New Zealand. Martin has some great insights about the New Zealand bonsai community as he's been growing bonsai there a long time, and I found it particularly interesting to hear what it's been like to come up with material in a community where there aren't as many bonsai growers. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation with Martin Walters. And on that note, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Wire podcast.
Sorry.
All right.
Sorry.
Well, introduce yourself. How did you get started with bonsai?
I lived in London for a while, and I had some trees there. So I probably had about 10 trees there, but they were on my next door neighbour's roof because we lived in a sort of flat. So I sort of got semi-started there, and then about 18 years ago we moved to New Zealand, and after the first year here, I had a garden, and so I wanted to really get into it then, and that was when things started to take off. But approaching it, I had that Karate Kid vibe. I'm the perfect age for when that came out, and I remember seeing it and thinking, that's really cool. It didn't really kickstart me, but I've always had an interest in Japanese culture, the samurais, the movies, just that whole aspect was with me. I did martial arts for quite a few years, and just because I loved being that sort of teaching environment and what you were learning, but I always kind of got hurt. So I kind of, I was just getting beat up. So I kept up the bonsai because it was the same sort of aspect for me, but it was more safer for me. So it's just stuck, and years have gone past, and it's just always been there. I was lucky enough after coming back to New Zealand to study under one of the original bonsai teachers in New Zealand that was from the 60s. So I sort of got the basics down pretty quick, and then started to travel overseas and invite people to study. So I sort of got really into it maybe 15 years ago. But I have a mentor. I have Tony Bebb, who's based in Australia, and his father, Lindsay Bebb. So Tony's kind of like my mentor, and he sort of comes to New Zealand maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and I'll always have time with him. So I've become good friends there. But I've got my little bonsai network that I sort of communicate with. The people that you admire, I've invited over to New Zealand, and they've been to shows and things. So I've got this sort of group now. So I've always trying to learn. So yeah, it's been about 18, 19 years.
Well, that's one thing that I always find so interesting is when a lot of people start bonsai, but it's only occasionally that people think, you know what, we need more of a community, and they immediately start going about building that community. And in New Zealand, I imagine that's a far more bootstrapping affair than it would be in other places. So what do you think led to that transition for you of doing it yourself to, hey, let's get more of a community doing this over here?
In the early days, I helped out on a workshop, and a whole lot of new people came in, and it was a totally beginner's workshop, and I was just helping the teacher. And the excitement that they had after you'd styled a tree, and I was thinking, yeah, I still have that now. So passing that on became a thing. And so I started to get involved in the other clubs. So I'm a member of 2 or 3 clubs and that type of thing, and always going around the country to help out and do things. That aspect never left. And also, if you're showing people how to do things and you're wiring their trees and you're helping them style, it will raise your game as well. And so I look at it as not only helping other people get started, but it helps me as well. And then I started to make friends. And then you turn around and you can walk into any club in any part of the country, and you already know half the people there, and they're all really nice, and you just build from that. But the last the last 5 years in New Zealand, it's just boomed.
Hmm.
I'm not too sure where that's come from, but if you go back even 10 years, I would hold a workshop and I'd advertise that I'm having a workshop, and you only want 10 to 15 people to come. And it was always a battle to find 8 or 9.
Hmm.
Now the workshops are sold out in like an hour and I can do
Wow.
2 or 3 of them. Yeah, it's that there just seems to be this buzz for it here, which is really good because all those new people that are starting out, they just boost the whole scene here. And
Hmm.
that means we can do more. Um, and so, with that boost and with that structure being set, we can now invite more international people here where we don't have to
Nice.
rely on Australia for them to come all the way here and only get 2 or 3 days work and have to tag on 2 weeks in Australia just to make the whole trip worth their while. Now we can
Right.
host them and they can travel up and down the country, and there'll be people at the workshops on every stop. And that's what I've been driving for. And so now that's in place, we've got a few things lined up. So, for instance, uh, January, February next year, we've got Jim Doyle coming over.
Oh, cool.
He's been here before. Trying to get him. We've got Murray Stenberger is in May or June next year. So we've got some cool people coming, and I want to keep that rolling.
Hmm.
Um, I just want. I've noticed here that when you have an international demonstrator come over, um, it just really gets us fired up, and it just gives us another aspect. And to have them work on your trees as well and have them leave the work that they've done so you can refer to it over time when
Hmm.
they've gone. So there is a selfish aspect to it, but it really gets us going. And I think a lot of people now that have started, they're on YouTube and they're on the internet and they get to know who the other people are. So when you announce that you've got someone coming, there's not a whole lot of new people going, we don't know who this is. Now they
Uh-huh.
know. And it's like, oh,
Right.
wow, you've got that happening. And they all just go for it. So we're at a good point. It's a really positive energy that's happening at the moment for us. And I just want to keep it going.
Well,
Sorry,
that's
I've
kind
just
of
had a couple
cool.
of cups of coffee. So I am rambling about it.
But I like that. It's instead of having to trial these different things to get people interested or to get them together, it sounds like the groundswell of interest is just in the air for whatever reason. And you're doing
Yeah,
whatever you can to facilitate and give a home for, or give a connection point for people to join into that
exactly.
excitement. And
Yeah,
that's where your
yeah,
international visitors comes in. It's where
yeah,
your workshops come in. It's anything that, oh, y'all are excited about this, let's find a way to get us all together and learning. So
exactly.
then as
Yeah,
long as we're learning, we can start making the material that we wish for,
yes,
that we had
yes.
more of around here.
Yeah, and then the trees get better, and then they
Mhm.
get seen overseas that we're actually a country that's got its own thing happening. So I'm hoping that's where we're going to be. It kind of happened in Australia a few years back, and I thought we were catching up to them, but
Mhm.
yeah, we've got this Australia, New Zealand. I don't know if you know, but we're kind of on the sporting field. We're kind of friends, but we're kind of always want to beat them. So I want to beat them.
I think everyone knows that about New Zealand.
Oh, okay. I thought, okay. So it's not the,
No, and you can refer to the All Blacks if you want. Like that's totally fine.
yeah,
That's fair.
yeah. Well, we just played them last week and we annihilated them. So that's what I don't want to bring that element into bonsai, but I kind of do.
Yeah, New Zealand's never been shy from competition, especially with your northern neighbor there. So
Yeah,
totally fair.
we're a small country, but we like to kick above our weight a little bit. And
And you come from a history of that. It's just part of
yeah,
the culture, I think.
yeah, I think, yeah. So
I mean, I've
we
heard
are
arguments about
friendly.
who makes better coffee between the two of you. So
Yeah. Well, when you come over here, I'll make you a killer cup of coffee, I promise.
oh, it sounds fantastic. Well, that sounds really great. So what has it been like having outsiders come and work on species they've never even seen before?
um, I think uh, I think the techniques are kind of similar.
Uh-huh.
Um, And I think they might ask a few questions about how this grows and how this goes, and what would happen if I cut this here. And you kind of tell them how the tree would react, and then they're away.
Hmm.
Uh, but normally after they've done a few workshops, they normally head off and see some of the countryside and see how. And I think when they come back, they're always like, okay, we understand it a little bit more.
Uh-huh.
Um, most of our trees we have grow on the coastlines, and so they overhang cliffs, and there's lots of big old gnarly trees that hang from the cliffs. So the
Oh,
whole
cool.
root system is very strong because they're not hanging on too much. So we use those trees quite a lot. But what the beauty is of having an international demonstrator come here is they'll add a Japanese element to a New Zealand style tree.
Hmm.
And that's something I want to portray in some of my trees, because it's a New Zealand tree and you're representing a New Zealand scene. But the way I trim my trees and the way I prune them is a bonsai aesthetic. So you're trying to balance that because you don't want to go too far either way. And so that's one aspect I sort of emphasize when the international people are here, that if you go too much into that pad structure, when you
Hmm.
see these trees in the wild, they're not like that. So you kind of balance that out a little bit. Um, there's one tree that's sitting behind me where, I don't know if you can see, you probably can't
Yeah.
see it, but um, this year, I think I've got the balance right. And
Hmm.
so you'll have a New Zealand, like when a brand new person to bonsai looks at this tree, they'll see a New Zealand beach scene where the tree's growing off a rock, um, but it's got a Japanese style canopy and it's like 2 or 3 pads, but it still fits in with the New Zealand scene. And
Mhm.
that's kind of where I want to take my New Zealand natives. Yeah, just because you want to do bonsai work on them, but you don't want to push them too far. So you kind of got to match them in the wild. So that's when the question was. Sorry, I've gone off the
Well, you're
question.
putting your finger right on what's for me is one of the more interesting aspects of bonsai is it's the relationship of people with trees. If we were only representing in miniature what we see in nature, we would be decorating model railroads,
Yeah,
landscapes. If we were
yeah,
just doing abstract art with trees,
yeah,
we'd be doing topiary. And
yeah,
bonsai is this funny thing where
yeah.
you represent the concept of a tree using a tree as your material.
Yes,
And
yes,
and then the question is, what are we choosing as our models? And so when you talk
yeah,
about the elements of Japanese design, is that the Japanese human side? Is that the Japanese species side? Is it some funny
yeah,
combination?
yeah.
Just looking at how the Japanese forms have been inspired by those trees in their landscapes. And then
Yes,
you start seeing internationally how
yeah,
elements of that have entered into our own relationships with our natives.
yep.
That exactly what you were describing is kind of one of the interesting things for me is where and how do we draw those lines? What do we choose for our models?
And do you think that comes with time of doing the bonsai work? Because a lot of the people here in the sort of under 10-year experience will get the New Zealand native trees and style them like what they've seen. And I think if you can learn that,
Mhm.
but then break the rules later on, does that make sense? To sort of bring it back round.
Right.
So
It can start in either place and travel toward the other at
yeah,
any point in time.
yeah. One of the best comments I had was I had a tree in a show, and the general public walked through the show, and there was a family, and I was standing next to my tree just doing some minor
Huh?
work, and the little boy said to his dad, "Oh, that's just like the tree that we've got at our holiday house," which is, and I was like, "That's it. That's all I want." If a child sees that, that was the best comment I've ever.
You
Like if
won.
that
Yeah.
tree takes them somewhere that they recognize in nature, that was it for me. I just had a smile, and
That's
that was
awesome. That's better than a
yeah.
blue ribbon.
I didn't get a blue ribbon for that tree, but that's beside the point. But yeah, that so if even though that tree did lean towards a heavy styling, it was still seen as a New Zealand native, and that was where I wanted it to head. Yeah.
It's I think that tension really informs the work that everyone's doing. And I think it actually, even though we're all consciously thinking about it, whether we're brand new at bonsai or whether we've been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years, I think it takes different forms based on people's experience. And that experience both reflects what technically are they able to do with these trees, as well as what forms have they found most interesting over the years,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
from their own domestic native scenes or their domestic, let alone exotic or international bonsai forms.
Yeah.
Any of those things are going to inform the work. But until people are consistently making patterns of artistic decisions, it's almost too early to even know where things stand. Otherwise, what we've done reflects what we just did, as opposed to we're trying to express something concrete
Yes.
through our work.
100%.
And that's what's got to be both fascinating and frustrating, not being in a more mature bonsai environment where you're literally having to grow the trunks and then grow the branches and decide what species to use and then build them before you can start creating the models that might be
Yes.
influencing people in your
Yes.
area.
100%. But
It's
also the time frame between having those early trees and developing the trunks, you've got to learn the skills of what you want to be able to do
yes.
the work to that tree later on. And I think once that point comes where you can look at a mature tree and know that you can do the work to portray that tree how you want it to be, then it starts to get fun.
It does. And then you find someone else you realize has been doing this in their backyard, inadvertently inventing a completely
Yeah.
different technique out of ignorance. And it's like,
Yes.
oh, we can do that. And then
Yes.
that starts
Yeah.
kind of percolating through the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah. And then you can add in your little bits and they can add in their little bits. And then all
Yeah.
of a sudden you've moved up another level. Yeah.
We have a great example of that with our coast redwood trees, where we've had actually right in my area, Northern California, a lot of history growing redwood as bonsai. And a friend of mine for, gosh, 20, 30 years has been developing his by pinching. And it's the most
Right.
dense little redwood. He has this tiny little tree. Well, it
Right.
took 20 years of him doing this before someone started taking that seriously and said, oh, what if we start doing this on a much bigger scale? All of a sudden, like you say, it stepped up to a whole different level.
Yeah.
Now we
Yeah.
all know you can make these trees as dense as you want. If you pinch them, you just need
Yeah.
to know kind of two little tricks to it, and then you're
Yeah.
fine. So
But
now
it
we
takes
know,
20
oh,
years.
okay. We just need to, well, you pinch the leaves while they're still immature. Once they've hardened off, they don't bud. If you
Yeah.
pinch this leaf when it's still soft, it'll bud right where you pinch.
Right.
So in
Okay.
other words, you can make the internode any length you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's still only just kind of starting to percolate through the community, even though we all theoretically should know it by now. It's
Yeah.
going to take a while for people to start building new styles of trees based on that. And that to me, I mean, it's hard to me not to be excited when I think of that.
No, it's great, and I'm kind of slow to take on information. I don't. It takes me. I'll do with my trees. I don't vary too much in species now because I've got my core trees. For
There's
me
some
to learn
momentum.
something else, but
Uh-huh.
something else would have to go. So. Um, I'll probably stick to about 10 different species because over the time I've got to know them.
Uh-huh.
And so I know what will happen if I do that at this time. Because we have very wet winters and spring can be quite wet too. So
Mhm.
things that you read overseas might not work here. And so you've really got to look at things differently here and learn what that tree does because there is some techniques that work and some that don't here.
Mm.
So we have to adapt. And for me, doing that year after year after year, it's just finally starting to sink in. Whereas other people will get it in the first two or three. It's just the way I am. So I think now, even with the substrate mixes and what we use here, for the climate here, it's finally coming right as to what we should be doing. So, um, yeah, I think a time factor coming in of that time frame and seeing how the trees react, it's now coming to a point where okay, we can do this here, and this will happen, and you'll get the maximum growth at this time if you
Right,
do
right.
this, and that's taken us quite a while. We had a bit of a sort of knowledge gap in the sort of going back 20 to 30 year gap ago
Hmm.
because we didn't have that new influx of people coming through. So when the internet sort of came out and people started to see a bit more, we didn't pick up on that for a little while. So we had a
Hmm.
bit of a gap, and I think we're just playing catch up now. It's yeah.
Well,
So
I
you
remember, yeah, when I got started, books and magazines from Japan was the sole vehicle we had for, otherwise, getting on a plane, of course, but
yeah
that was readily available. It was pictures in a magazine and that we couldn't read a single word of,
yeah
and some books also couldn't read
yeah.
a word.
Well,
And
we couldn't buy pots or stands. In fact, now it's still quite hard. But
mhm,
if you're going back when I first started, buying a bonsai pot to suit a tree that you have was nearly impossible. There
mhm,
was there was nobody doing pots. Now it's a lot easier,
yeah,
but you'd have trees that were beautifully styled, but the pots don't match because you
right.
just physically can't get a pot. You'd have people go overseas and carry them back in their hand luggage, and that was the only ones there. Things have moved on from that a bit now, but yeah, there was nothing for us.
That's
Even
crazy.
buying stands here.
I don't know where you can get stands anywhere. I think everyone has trouble
Specifically
with
this day.
stands. Stands are
Okay,
tough. I mean,
yeah,
in North America, it's not five well-known stand makers.
right. I can't think of one here. There's people for stands that I've had made. I've had to go to furniture makers and give
Uh-huh.
them dimensions, and this is what I want. And
Yeah.
there's not that sort of stand maker that's got a flair that's coming up with things like what they're doing with pots here now. We've got a few people doing pots that are coming up with their own ideas and their own styles, but we don't have that for stands yet,
Yeah.
which is a real
That's
shame.
always the last. And of course,
Yeah,
that brings up the bigger question of whether or not there's a better way to display a tree than by putting a table on a table.
right. Now we get into it. Now, yeah.
Well, I'm
Um,
curious. You mentioned that you're kind of limiting yourself to roughly 10 species. Are there any two or three species that you would get a kick out of seeing people growing outside of New Zealand? Assuming the weather would work out for them. What species would you think would be fun to see online? Oh, look, they're growing one of these.
we have a New Zealand tree called a Pohutukawa, which is known as the New Zealand Christmas tree.
Oh,
So
uh-huh.
around Christmas time, hence the name,
You
it
get the red fuzzy
produces
things.
it gives the red fuzzy things.
We have
So
those all
that's
over my town.
right. Is it a
Sideroxylon, isn't it?
it's
Metrosideros sideroxylon.
myrtle? Yeah, it's in the myrtle family.
Uh-huh.
It's there's similar trees, but our ones are better. just because just because on the coast where they grow, if it's Christmas time, they produce this lovely red flower. So they're known. So I would love to see them overseas to see what happens with them there.
Well, I should consider that. Yeah. I think yours is the Metrosideros excelsa. And
That's it. Yep.
literally, we have a whole bunch of them in my town. Maybe
Right.
not the same species, but or the same
So
exact
ours,
cultivars that you've got. But
yeah,
we do have a
you
whole
do
bunch of them
have
in
it.
town. That's one of the common ones I happen to know. Go
So
figure.
our one's growing in the wild, 500, 600 years old, and we've
Wow.
we've got a lot of multi-trunk ones. They're a very
Mm.
multi-trunk tree, um, but they're very special here. There's a lot of there's a lot of spiritual aspect to them. So,
Oh,
uh,
nice.
and you're not allowed to go out into the wild and dig these trees out. They're a very special tree. Even if you buy a house and there's one on the section that you don't want, you can't go ahead and cut it down. It's a very special tree. So
Oh, interesting.
having them as a bonsai tree in a refined state, um, they're quite. I'm not saying rare, but they're semi-rare because you can't just go and collect them. So
Interesting.
they're very special to have in your collection.
Now, are they
Um,
grown as nursery stock?
you could grow, yeah, you could grow them as they are in nurseries, but when they get older, they have the hanging roots and they
Right.
form like big blankets of roots coming down. So nurseries will have them and they will be available, but the older ones, the ones that look like that they've been in the
That
wild,
have great character.
yeah, yeah. Um, so the couple that I have in my collection are handed down. So now the older generation of bonsai artists, which have had those trees for 50, 60 years, they're coming to be passed on. So that's the availability of all the good
Wow.
stuff, the good stuff. So we're at that point now where the next generation are taking over the other generation's trees.
Mhm.
I know not a particularly nice subject when they're handing trees on, but that's where the good stock for us comes from. And so,
Same over
it,
here. The best trees are in
yeah,
private
it's not a very
collections.
nice subject when the person's handing on trees because they know they can't take care of them. But
Uh,
from picking up a good tree for your collection, that's
well,
really
another way to look at it, it's a beautiful sign of success, as we all know that we're signing on to things that if we succeed, they're going to outlive us and get,
100%.
as we get funkier and funkier with age, they're going to get
Yeah,
more and more
yeah,
distinguished. And the sign
yeah,
of success is when someone else can then, we can pass the torch and let them do what they will with
exactly.
it.
Yeah, and that's where we're kind of on the verge of in New Zealand as those trees being handed on to the next generation, and
Uh-huh.
there's quite a bit of that happening at the moment.
Mhm.
Um, and so, but the beauty is a lot of that stock hasn't been fine wired.
Mhm.
So you've got the beautiful trunks, but they haven't been doing the fine wiring because it's too hard for
Well,
hands.
that
Too much
sounds like a
work.
perfect starting point.
Honestly, it's perfect. Yeah,
I mean, we wish we
that's
had
what.
those coming out of our ears. That's what you
Yeah,
want, is the age and the character, and then we can
yeah,
decorate those trunks best we
yeah,
can with the
yeah,
foliage.
yeah. And those are the golden trees.
Mhm.
And quite a lot's happened. Quite a lot of that work has happened to me over the last 2 or 3 years, and
Nice.
now they're my favorite trees. So I'm not selling or passing on those people's trees, and they'll be the ones that I'll hand on. So it's
Well,
just
so those will be the nice exemplars that will, as those come along, as you post those online, I'll be able to say, that to me looks like a New Zealand tree. That
right.
would be exciting
Okay.
to say, I see some characteristics in this that are specific to this region, these growth patterns, whatever this
Yes.
vibe is that is happening. That to me would be exciting to see.
Awesome. Okay. So where I'm because we're very coastal and the trees are growing off the beach, off the cliffs
Uh-huh.
into the beach, you kind of encroach on the whole pinging aspect of it, of
Mhm.
displaying the whole scene. And that's something I'm working on at the moment, where you're not just showing one massive Pohutukawa that's growing over a rock. You're actually taking the scale way bigger and showing a whole New Zealand beach scene in a pinging style. And that's another exciting aspect for us here.
Well, seriously, yeah. So what's other than the Metrosideros, what's another fun species you'd like to see?
We have a tree called the Totara. Um,
Totara.
Totara, Tora, which kind of looks like a U Texas type of vibe.
Oh, interesting.
You pulled that up.
No, I'm looking at TOT
Uh, sorry, Totara.
ARA, Totara. Oh, neat.
So that's like a very regal boss of the forest type of tree. Very, they're pretty common, and we can use them for bonsai quite a bit. They make very good group planting trees.
Yeah, you kind of
They're
described
quite
it right.
free.
The foliage looks like you, but the form
Yeah,
of some of the mature ones Some look like big oaks, actually. Some of them grow
Yeah,
taller, some with really rounded forms and just
yeah,
great trunks and roots on them.
yeah, and they have a very cool bark that sort of peels
Hmm.
later on. Yeah, yeah, that's one of my favorite ones. And what you can find is on the farms where you have a fence line, the farmers would plant the totras next to the posts
Uh-huh.
on the farm, and the totras would grow round the
Oh,
posts.
windbreaks.
Yeah, and then the posts would disintegrate, and you can find these spiral totras that still look like they should have a post running through the middle. So people use them for fences, and they'll sort of guide them a little bit, or they'll put wire in them. So you'll have totra hedgerows, and they've
Mhm.
just got one thin wire running the complete way down the hedgerow, but all the totras are just stick to that line, and they've been pruned back, so it's like a square hedge, but they've got
Uh-huh.
beautiful old trunks. So
That's so cool.
yeah, that happened a lot in the 70s and 80s. So now, when these hedgerows come out, or the people don't want that hedge in their house, you get a call up to say, look, we've got all these
Oh,
totras that need to be taken out, and they've got big, beautiful bases, but everything's real tight,
yeah.
running quite flat, but they're there. So finding that sort of system is good.
Yeah, it'd be a great starting point. It also sounds like it might be a good candidate for someone were they interested in ground growing the species. Because if they're planting
Yeah,
them for windbreaks, they likely grow quickly.
yeah. They're not so high for the windbreak. They sort of more of a feature hedge.
Hedge, okay.
Um,
Closer
they're
to a
not.
U.
Yeah, they're not like a. They that quite possibly could be done, but there'll be other species here that
Gotcha.
will grow faster. They're not a fast growing tree. So
Uh-huh.
when you see them in a house, and it's up to your waist type height, but the trunks are as thick as your leg, but they've all been kept quite tight. That's the sort of environment where we can find some nice ones. So
That
for
sounds like it'd be
us,
super cool.
yeah, for us, where you go out and collect your beautiful junipers, and they're all there, you can. For us, that's more of an urban environment where you'll find those sort of trees.
Is
Um,
any collecting out in nature allowed in New Zealand, or is that pretty much locked down?
uh, we do go on collecting trips. We probably go 2 or 3 times a year, but we have to ask the landowner.
Mhm.
So there's an area that we go where the whole wilding pine thing is a thing. So they're happy for us to take pines out, but we collect a lot of hawthorn. We have
Oh,
we have a lot of hawthorn. So we've got that English hawthorn privet vibe happening here. So when we collect, the trees have normally been chewed by cows, so they're kept
mm,
quite short. The farmers don't want hawthorns in their land because the cows are getting scratched and all that type of thing. So we do contact farms and say, "Do you have any
nice.
hawthorns? Do you have any of these trees?" And like, yeah, you just come and collect them. You, you're doing us a favor. So we had one collection trip about 4 or 5 years ago, and the farmer was so grateful that we were coming out to take the hawthorn out. He gave us the off-road little carts to drive around.
Nice.
Just please take whatever you like. So
And are those
that
all exotic? Those all
a
came over
little
with
bit,
the
yeah, yeah.
early
We've
European settlers?
Yeah, New Zealand's very our whole New Zealand native birds and trees are very special. So we're
Yeah.
trying to eradicate all the pests and take the New Zealand native bush back to how it was.
Mhm.
So all those wilding pines, we have a big issue with ferrets and stoats that eat the New Zealand native birds' eggs. So
Well, your
as
birds are a national treasure because you've
100%,
got
yeah.
this whole archipelago of no predators. You have the most amazing
We're trying to
birds.
get to that, yeah. So
Yeah.
we have islands that are in the Gulf, which are like a bird sanctuary,
Uh-huh.
and there's no rats, there's no possums, and the birds flourish. And
Oh,
that's
that's so
starting
great.
to, yeah. So New Zealand as a whole is trying to eradicate all the pests, mostly the ones that come from Australia and just nailed our country. Like trying to eradicate them so that we get back to the New Zealand native bush and birds. So
Yeah.
so the whole tree aspect of getting rid of all these pests is a big thing here.
Well, that's a neat additional aspect to it. As you mentioned, on the one hand, there is the culture of trees and aspects of nature being sacred. And then there's the other of you have this opportunity where you're right on the verge of having this, kind of unique situation that's only in so many places on earth, really, where you
Exactly.
have these
Yeah.
trees that
Yeah.
kind of developed on their own, isolated
Yeah.
for extremely long periods of time. And that's what's given you this great diversity and these
And
fascinating.
that has to be saved. And
Yeah.
there's areas in New Zealand where you can walk and it feels like a dinosaur could just walk around the corner any second. It's just madness. So yeah, we haven't seen them yet, but there is talk that there is the old one out there.
Watch out for Bigfoot. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, we there's a few areas where you go and collect, and you're just stunned by how beautiful this spot is,
Yeah.
and there's no one else around. Yeah,
Well,
that's
and we can all thank Peter Jackson for teaching that to the world of how many
yeah,
of those
yeah,
places you have.
yeah. We're kind of over Lord of the Rings.
Oh, I'd imagine that happened pretty darn quickly, honestly.
No,
But I
no,
will
we
say it
haven't done
right.
that.
It rose in everyone's estimation as a result of that outside of New Zealand, and
Yeah,
so that's pretty great.
yeah. We had Will Badley come over
Hmm.
from England, and lovely, lovely guy. And I took him to Hobbiton, and
Hmm.
he'll probably hate me for bringing this up, but he stood under the party tree. It's where the hobbits have the party before
Hmm.
Bilbo puts on the ring. So there's a big tree there, and there's like all the sort of flags and the tables, so it looks like the Hobbiton. And he said to me, "I'm just going to take a minute here." I was like, "Okay, that's fine. You do what you want." And he walked up to the tree and he took a little leaf. He was like holding onto a branch, and I went up to him and said, "Are you all right?" And he was choked up. It was beautiful. And you might have to edit this out because he will hate me for saying this, but that was a touching moment.
That you extra humanized them, so
Yeah,
good
yeah.
job,
So that
Will. I
yeah.
appreciate that.
So what I'm trying to get to is that beauty that you saw in the Lord of the Rings movies and the landscape. That's real.
Yep.
That's here, and yeah, and I think that because Hobbiton's made to look like a beautiful English sort of countryside
Right.
town, and they do portray that. So I think that hit home with him a little bit.
The one thing that stood out looking at the natural landscape is where we might have a ridge that looks as beautiful or a valley. You could just see from some of the aerial photography, you would have ridge after ridge after ridge of that undisturbed beauty, or valley after valley after valley of that amazing
That's beautiful.
bucolic scenery.
Yeah, that's beautiful. One of the best things you can do here is take a helicopter ride
Uh,
through the Milford Sound.
mhm.
Uh, you might have to Google the Milford Sound, but that's one of the top spots.
That
You
sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's expensive. It's one of the best things you can do. Yeah.
But it's one of those things you can't do anywhere else. And so that makes all
No,
kinds of
and you
sense.
can't get to these spots any other way. So,
Yep.
but just flying through there, yeah.
So one of the very first things you mentioned was that there aren't a lot of, growers or nurseries for bonsai material in New Zealand, but there are some options for starting with young stock, whether it's people supplying that or it's getting that in nurseries. And one interesting thing that comes from that is a friend from Japan actually looked at that as I was lamenting my garden so many years ago when it was just table after table of young seedlings that I'd been growing.
Mhm.
And he said, well, that made sense then because there were no other options. Like if you wanted that species, you had to make it yourself. They weren't growing in the landscape. You kind of had to start. So that made sense for the business at that time or for your hobby at that time.
Yeah.
as things start progressing and you've done that for a generation or two, that's when, oh, we can now start to reap the benefits from having trees that are further along or a
Yeah.
slightly more mature community. And so you're in
Yes.
those kinds of, it feels like you're one, if you've got 2 feet, one step is in that
Yep.
first beginner step, but it feels like the other leg is stepping into the next, and that you're kind of right at that spot right now in New Zealand, which is a
Yes.
kind of exciting place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like I always think of it as like a band that's toured. And they've toured all
Nice.
the real small clubs and the real downbeat bars, and they're finally getting a name for themselves.
Yes.
But they've used all that time to get good at what they're doing, and now they've got their own sound. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we're on that exciting cusp, and the beauty of it is that there's a handful of us that are riding that have been on that wave, and we're riding it now, and we've sort of picked that whole level up, and
Right.
those stock trees are coming in now. So if new people start now, they do have access to really good stock. So that's one of the best moves that I think we've had, because a lot of people might get bored in the first year or two
Mhm.
because there's no momentum there. Whereas now we have that and they can keep
Nice.
moving. And I think that's helped us to keep the whole scene rolling. And I think that's why we're at a point now where we've got a good foundation, because we've got the stock, we've got the people that know what they're doing to keep the whole thing rolling.
So apart from having a few international people coming to visit and teach across the country, what other bridges do you see between New Zealand and the greater bonsai community? Have people looked into studying abroad or at least just traveling to events? Have you seen a little bit of that?
For sure. Yeah. So people will go overseas. There is people studying overseas at the moment, and a few people will do the 3 or 4 months in Japan and come back. Um, but you'll notice on the sort of international scene, you had a few people come to the expo. Um,
Scott, if you're listening, we love you. Thanks for coming.
yeah, we love Scott. So yes, we are getting out there more. There was a few of us went to the WBFF convention in Saitama a few years ago.
Oh, neat. Were you there?
Yeah, yes, I was there. Yeah.
Oh, I was there too. Missed you.
Oh, okay. that was a changing time for me
That
there.
was an unbelievable, unprecedented event.
That I
That was
still
a
look
special
back on
thing.
that. Yeah, I look back on that now, and was that a dream? It was just a beautiful experience. Um, so we are getting out there, but also I've been invited to a club demonstration in Australia next year. So things are slowly starting to happen. Um, and what I mentioned earlier about going to the bonsai shows for the Mid Atlantic a few months ago, just touching base with the people out there and becoming friends with them, things happen from that. So the world kind of gets smaller. And so um, just the communication, I think, with other clubs and other demonstrators moves things forward, and we find ourselves going to different things. Um, and that's happening for quite a few of us. So I think you'll start to see more Kiwis tapping you on the shoulder in Canada, or different events will be there. So I think from an international point of view, we'll sort of filter out into the system a little bit more.
Uh-huh.
And you'll kind of know us because we sound different from the Australians, but we've got a bit more going for us. So you'll kind of know us, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I would not
Oh,
disagree
it's
with
so
any of
much
that. That
so.
sounds dead on. That's a fair statement.
Okay.
So, when you are looking at bonsai, say outside of New Zealand, in the US, in Japan, have you
Mhm.
seen anything in the work abroad that triggers something in how you've seen your trees or the New Zealand scene? Do you ever think, oh, it looks like they're at this stage and we're aiming towards that? Or, oh, they're just starting with this species, we're a little further along with that. Has anything
Yeah,
clicked at all when you see
I
such different
think
species and techniques?
I think our whole deadwood carving side has picked
Uh,
up a lot.
uh-huh.
We've really got into the carving side of things in the last few years. So
Mhm.
the beautiful junipers that you see overseas with beautiful dead wood and carving, I think we're now getting into that a lot more. Um, so the styling aspect of a tree will always add something to it. We'll always add a bit of interest to the trunk, or we're not just going in and cutting off branches because they shouldn't be there. We're going to carve that branch now.
Oh,
That's
cool.
starting, that's starting to happen a whole lot more. So we're starting to see trees here that have the character of trees overseas.
Mhm.
So we're not just trimming everything right back to where it should be. We're adding a lot more character in. So when we see big, beautiful junipers with big wave forming deadwood features, we're trying to bring that in here.
Oh,
Um,
fun.
yeah, so that side of it's happened. And we had Will Badley come over here maybe 5, 6 years ago. And we've had more people come to a carving workshops than what we've had to anything else. And we're
Mhm.
still getting off on that buzz since he's left.
Oh, that's
So
great.
that really pushed us a little bit as well, because um, we're a very, with the whole carving and the wood being carved, that's sort of in our culture a little bit here too.
Mm.
So that was an easy step for us. So that side of it's really been pushed the last few years, and that's purely from seeing what's happening, what's happening overseas. I think
Mhm.
also as well, with the more flamboyant showing of trees and the different styles of pots that's been used overseas, we're getting a lot of that here now. There's a lot of people pushing the display aspect. Um, they see something done overseas, particularly Ryan Neal's work with all
Mhm.
his ceramics. That's having a massive influence here. People are trying.
Nice.
Yeah, that's having a big influence, and you'll have new people come into workshops, and they'll say, and they've bought a pot, or they've bought some sort of machinery or some sort of metal container that they want to use, and they go, I saw this on a run. I was like, okay, yes. So that aspect has really come through. So
Neat.
the whole container aesthetic and what you can use as a container to portray your tree has moved up a lot here.
And I think it's really helped for communities that don't have a deep or a rich ceramics for bonsai,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
if you just don't have the options, it's really time to start looking in different directions, both in terms
yep,
of the media used, but also the styles that and forms that it happened to take.
yep. And that's become quite a thing here,
Hmm.
which is good. So, you'll see some crazy things, but I think it's also, and what I want to get across to the people that come to my workshops is that sometimes that tree gets lost completely in whatever container you're showing it in. It might be a lot better when the tree's grown into it a bit more, but um, you'll see some crazy ideas for containers, but they just want to use whatever tree they have in the container, and sometimes it doesn't quite work. It's not quite there yet, but we're learning it. And
Mhm.
I think if people are practicing it, that side of things will move up as well. Does that
That's
make
so cool.
sense?
It does, because as soon as you get into well, I guess a lot of things follow from using different containers, because as soon as it's a different material, it's obviously going to start taking different forms.
Yeah,
And when you're not starting from a point of tradition, but from the point of, I need a thing for my tree to grow in, you're going
yeah,
to bring just such a blank slate of perspectives to
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And so you can end up in some really fun places,
yeah,
which
for sure.
honestly will translate into whatever gets ending up being used as stands and or other display
Yes, yeah,
um, features or items, because
yeah,
you're going to be building this entire context in which the trees are going to be shared with viewers,
yes,
which is kind of
exactly.
fun.
And I think also, if that person's new to starting trees, if they're thinking about the container and the different styles of container at that same point as when they're learning, they'll learn them both at the same time as they work their
Hmm.
way through. Whereas I didn't have that. It was a bonsai pot. It's a bonsai pot. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's still a bonsai pot. but you're working on that tree for 10 years without giving any thought to the pot that is in until
Hmm.
you start to see other pots and other styles. People now are seeing all these wild different containers, and the trigger in your brain is already thinking, "Oh, I can do this, I can do that," and I didn't have that,
Well,
which
it's
is a
funny. I
shame.
was just talking about this with Michael Hagedorn. It takes years and years to kind of internalize the Japanese aesthetic of what kind of containers or
Yeah,
what characteristics of what kind of containers may or may not be a match for a given tree. And
yeah,
that's all just one tiny sliver of the
yeah.
available experience that we all could have with different
Yes,
containers.
yes,
And that takes a ton of work just to get
yes,
that one little
yeah,
bit right. But
yeah.
these days, there's no reason anyone even has to engage those kinds of
No,
containers or that artistic approach. They could just start
no,
on a whole different plane
yeah,
and end up who knows where. And
yeah,
it's really up to the individuals that form the communities, what they want in
yeah,
their gardens and what'll be carried on generation to generation as time goes by.
yeah. And it's so exciting knowing that you've got your trees established, but where they're heading in their containers for the
Mhm.
next 20 or 30 years that I've got, that's what's keeping me going with my collection of trees, because I've reached the peak of what I can handle,
Mhm.
and I do style them and they do change. But where those trees and what containers they're going to end up in the next 5 to 10 years, that's very, very special to me. So
Mhm.
I love that aspect of it. And I think there's so much room to move in it, but you do have to do the homework first. You do have to learn first.
Yeah, that's unfortunately a very helpful reminder in that you can get more out of it if you do your homework, like you say,
Yeah,
if you do at least internalize why people do things the way they do, it can beneficially inform where things go from there.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
it's fun to have crazy outsiders. It's fun to
yeah,
have
yeah.
the really informed people, or what we so often end up with are people who may have been kind of inculcated along a certain line of, or a certain approach, maybe traditional pots, for instance. And yet, if they only have available this other kind of material, or they take an interest in that, then that means as they investigate that new avenue, they'll be doing it with some kind of already formed ideas about
Yes,
the
yeah,
size, the shape, the direction, the
yeah,
colors, the textures, any
yeah,
of those kind of things.
yeah. It's awesome. I think back. I showed an old Scots pine tree in a show about 7 or 8 years ago, and in the soil I put little tiny lights, and I've never seen. And so when it was shown, there's four lights that are equal to the soil, and they just shine up into the tree.
Oh,
So when
wow.
people walk past, the tree sort of glowed. And I'm an electrician, so this, if I'm matching lights to trees, this is like home for me. Um, I've always thought, why haven't people added lighting more into there? So that I'm
We do
very
it in the landscape. Why not the
yeah,
bonsai?
yeah. And the lights were tiny, and so one of the best things we did was when everybody had left home, uh, left to go home, we turned off all the lights in the hall and just left the lights on this tree, and it was beautiful. Just the tree glowing in the middle of darkness. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because, what are our kind of analogs for that? But, Ryan Neal's first big show, the Artisans Cup, the room was just plain dark, and
Yes.
we had
Yeah.
spots on the trees, and
Yeah.
it was very challenging to see the trees, but it was the most dramatic setting you could
Yes.
create. And then there's
Yeah.
the fun side of that. That was the more museum dark take.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just locally, we have a bonsai collection, a public garden in Oakland, California, and
Yeah.
they do a festival of lights. And so
Oh,
this garden's one of many gardens that are all together in this complex, and they open up after dark. It's actually coming up pretty soon, I think. And
wow.
they light up every single tree, whether it's with Christmas
Beautiful.
lights or spots or different things. So it's the more levity filled or fun take on
Yeah.
that same kind of approach. But you
Yeah.
get to see the structure that way. And I think that's
Yeah.
what people
Yeah.
really appreciate about it.
Yeah. I've got all of my trees are on stands which are black,
Uh-huh.
and my lights are on spouts. So my lights are about head high, but they're on a little hook,
Oh,
and
that's
so the
cool.
light shines directly into the tree. So when it's dark and you turn it on, every tree just floats around the garden.
Super
So
drama. I like that.
super drama. That's how, yeah. It's only good. Yeah. So you can sit. Yeah, it's a little bit of work, but it works. So if the light's equal to the tree and it just picks off the trunk, and it's not super bright, but they just glow. So yeah, I'm heading down the lighting, pinging New Zealand scene vibe.
Well,
We'll
you're
see.
giving us something to look forward to. We'll see what this morphs into over the next 5, 10 years
Yeah,
when you do have more time for bonsai to
I
see.
will keep you informed.
Well, that's one of the best things actually about keeping it on the site and not making this the main focus today is when it's a more precious amount of time that's going into bonsai, when bonsai is the alternative to whatever the daily work is, as
Yeah,
enjoyable or not as it may be, what happens is you start to do the things that are the most exciting, that are the most
yes,
precious to you. And that
yes,
can really inform what you do when you do have more time for bonsai.
yes,
So
yep,
knowing that that's
100%.
5, 10 years out actually gives you that limited amount of time. It sounds like a
Yes,
lot, but it
yeah,
actually is a limit. And then
but
you'll be able to invest in whatever of those
yeah,
directions. Maybe at that point you'll have found a home for a collection, a public
yeah,
collection. Maybe you'll have some really concrete ideas about displays.
yeah. That yeah, that's the area I'm kind of I can feel. I think sometimes bonsai just takes you down these little avenues that you never quite like. Uh, that you never quite thought you would go, but there's one aspect of bonsai that you all of a sudden like more than anything else, and I'll just see where that goes. Last 2 years, I've been making slabs and
Oh, fun.
rock formations and learning the techniques for that, and that's taking me down another little avenue. So that also would encroach on the display aspects.
Mhm.
So um, yeah, definitely the display and the presentation of what I've got at home has become key for me
Uh-huh.
now. Yeah.
Well, what's nice is what you're saying about the containers, the stands, the display, the lighting, and the community. It's all kind of forming itself all at once. And so it sounds like a unique opportunity to come up with some somewhat novel approaches. And so that's
Mm.
it's just kind of heartening to hear. I mean, I'm sure it's a lot more frustrating. Sometimes I just want to be able to buy a tree, or sometimes I just want to get a tool or a
Yeah.
pot. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's easy for me to sit on the outside and say, "Oh, that
Yeah.
sounds very great that you're doing all that work." But
But it's
it's
hard
not
work.
lost on me how much work that actually
Oh,
is.
that's good. Yeah. But that's what drives us as well.
Yeah.
So if that passion doesn't wane and you're having to fight a little bit harder to get what you want,
Mhm.
when you get it, it means a whole lot more.
For sure.
And that's, I think, where we're at in New Zealand. Yeah.
Do you have would a visitor to bonsai gardens in New Zealand find many exotic species?
Um,
Pines, junipers, maples, whatever it might happen to be.
yes, you would. You would see a lot of pines. You would see a lot of maples. We have a lot of the maples that everybody else has. They do graft a lot of them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we would have most. Well, we've probably got a few junipers that you would recognize, maybe a few that aren't quite the same. I just got two junipers into my collection that we're still not sure what they are. They've got a completely different color to anything else, so there's still the odd surprise. But we are pine heavy. Um, we have a lot of ficus. There's a lot of
Oh,
ficus
okay.
growing here. Yeah, I don't think I we don't seem to have as many exotics as what Australia does, where they seem to be on the forefront of what they've got going there.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I can't think of too many other exotics that you would see that vary from what you already have there.
Yeah, it seems like in Australia, a number of exotic trees or seeds came in a long time ago. And so there is a
Yeah,
little bit of tradition of people that had been growing pines for 20, 30, 40 years in some
yeah,
cases. I went to a
yeah,
couple nurseries down there and was, yeah, surprised that I knew as many species as I did
yeah,
because walking
yeah,
around the landscape and going to the parks, you see,
yeah,
everything but that. And
yeah.
then, but the bonsai community, at least at the time, I think it's very different now where it really was a mix of natives and exotics.
Yeah, we yeah we do have that, but Australia just seems to have a lot more going on with their trees and what they can use.
Uh-huh.
Um, but they've got all the nasty spiders and the snakes and everything. We don't have any of that. So I think it's
From
a bit of,
everything poisonous to nothing
yeah, yeah,
poisonous.
yeah.
Yep.
We're a lot more safer here. So maybe that shows in our trees a little bit that we're a little bit more safer, but um, we kind of have what we have and we use it the best that we can,
Uh-huh.
if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And that's actually a really nice note. Speaking of, we know you're online. Where will people find samples of these neat New Zealand species of yours?
So my bonsai club is called Kenzo Bonsai, Kenzo. You can find me on Facebook under that, and that's where I'll post all my sort of club days and what's going on with the club. My personal Facebook and Instagram page is actually all trees as well. It's not really a personal page, so I tend to keep the club stuff on the Kenzo page, and then my own personal page is just what I'm up to with trees, really. So yeah, I'm not
Nice.
that hard to find.
Well, cool. And final pitch you have to make to get people, were someone coming for a bonsai tour to New Zealand, what might that tour include?
Ooh, is it just a bonsai tour, or are they coming to see the country? You
Well,
kind of
we're
have to
going to
get
take that part for granted, but that there
right. Okay.
are, it's probably easy
Um,
to find good touristy things to do in New Zealand. However,
it's not too
touristy
hard. No,
bonsai things,
I
that
would.
one,
Right, bonsai. I would hire a car and I would drive from the top of the North Island down to the bottom of the South Island. I want to shout out. We've probably got the most southern bonsai club in the world here. There's a place in New Zealand called Invercargill, which is right at the bottom of the South Island.
oh, wow.
There's a guy down there called Mark who is a forest expert,
Mhm.
and I would take a trip down and see him. I think he's claimed the most southern bonsai club in the world. The next stop is Antarctica, so there's not much going on down there. So yeah, when you come to New Zealand, you've got to get out on the road,
Mhm.
and I would travel, and I would give you stops all the way down of beautiful bonsai people that would happily show you around their collections, and you would get a vibe of trees that grow in the South Island that don't necessarily grow in the North Island, and
Mhm.
a different vibe all the way down. That's what I'll be doing, and you get to meet some really cool people.
That sounds, and drink some good coffee.
And coffee, probably a bit stronger than coffee, but that's but yes, there will be some good coffee.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Well, Martin, thanks so much for chatting today. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Jonas. It's been really nice to meet you, and it's been a great chat.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The music on today's podcast is brought to you by the fine folks at Blue Dot Sessions. Check them out at www.sessions.blue.